All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Dr. Adam Mathews, and with Mathews Counseling, and every single month we offer resources around different issues or mental health and relational health and behavioral health. And it is June, so it is Pride Month. So happy Pride, everybody. And we are talking today with one of our amazing therapists, Beckett West, about gender identity and validating gender identity and feeling affirmed in your gender identity. So, Beckett, why don't you just start us off by talking about kind of just this, it's a big topic right now as well around gender identity, and really helping people feel affirmed in it, because there's a lot of challenges there. So just talk to me first about why this is so important for us to be having this conversation about gender identity and helping people feel valid in their gender identity and expression.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's a really big topic right now with everything kind of going on in the world right now. And I think like social media and stuff like that, we're becoming more exposed to it. You know, trans people and gender expansive people have always existed. But I think we're getting exposed to it a little bit more because of social media and things like that. So I think some people who, you know, have questioned their identity before are becoming more exposed to that and kind of realizing like, hey, there is somewhere I can go with this. There are things I can do for this. So I think it is impacting more people than people really realize. You know, your loved one or your sibling or thing like that could be experiencing something like this. So I think it's really big right now to kind of create that environment where, you know, you're not alone. There are other people that are experiencing kind of similar things, you know, and like with anything, there's going to be barriers to it, but there are ways that you can kind of combat that. So I think it's just really important to know that, you know, you're not crazy for feeling the way that you're feeling, and there are kind of ways to go about and feel better about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really negative repercussions for individuals when their gender identity is invalidated, and there's so many external forces, as you talked about, that are already pressing on trans folks and gender expansive folks to like invalidate that. That's an external invalidation, which can really translate to internal invalidation. And when that happens, what are the things that you see or know that in your clients or when other people, that when there's internal invalidation going on of their gender identity, what do they do? How do people suffer when that happens?
Yeah, I think with a lot of it kind of has the comorbidity where, you know, depression spikes more, anxiety, people will start to maybe not be as social. They'll kind of withdraw from friends and family, spend more time isolated in their homes, not really engage in finding support or things they used to enjoy. So that's really kind of the main ways I feel like, you know, people kind of begin to question other aspects of themselves, like who really am I? So a lot of like social withdrawal and more like depressive symptoms in general. Yeah,
and the extreme nature of that, right, is suicidality, right? I think we know this, that the stats play that out, is that trans individuals in particular are 4 times as likely than the general population not just to be suicidal, but to attempt suicide. And so part of that internal validation that we're talking about feeling valid in your gender identity really is a movement against battling back against depression, battling back against anxiety, and battling back against high rates of suicidality. So it's super important. So what are some of the barriers? What are some of the barriers for individuals from feeling valid in their gender identity and expression?
Yeah, I think you know, it really kind of depends on the individual situation, obviously. Some people might experience all of these, some might only experience like 1 or 2. But just kind of general speaking, these are kind of the main 3 that, you know, from working with my clients and doing research, I found. So the first one, obviously, kind of goes a lot with what's going on in the world right now. Religion and spirituality. A lot of religions are not taught to be very accepting of this. So it can be really hard, especially, you know, we live in the South. So people kind of brought up in this Bible Belt, brought up in this way that, you know, we're not accepting of this. A lot of people's are struggling like with their families. not necessarily being accepting because of how they've been raised. Whether it's Christianity, Catholicism, like any kind of religion can be encompassed in this. And then kind of going along with that, societal expectations kind of tie into that, whether it is based on religion or not. I think we have pretty clear ideas. Like if you say what a man looks like, it's very, we all get a picture in our mind, kind of like what that looks like, what masculinity looks like. So I think a lot of it is, stepping outside that box, and, not all men are going to fall in this one box. Not all women are going to fall in this other box. So a lot of it is, anything kind of pushing that boundary can be seen as a barrier and something that, could kind of put a target on your back, depending what you're doing, what circumstance you're in. And then the last one I've kind of really found that also plays into that is family and living situations, especially with like teenagers. You're wanting to explore your gender identity and your parents are not okay with that. It's hard to seek out the services. You don't necessarily have access to therapy or to the clothing that you would want, or HRT. So a lot of that can kind of be very difficult of, what can I do if my parents are not supportive, or, maybe my spouse or whatever my living situation is, maybe transitioning or expressing who you really are puts that at risk. You could get kicked out or lose your housing or scholarships, depending what school you go to. So it really kind of can have a lot of impacts and a lot of things to consider when deciding, like, how do I want to go through this transition?
Yeah, and what you're describing in general is just a lot of, again, those external forces that are invalidating of your gender identity, and which is so hard to then fight back against on your own, right? I think that's why the stats kind of play that out of like that one affirming individual, right? I think cuts the suicide rate in half for trans individuals, and that piece of it is when you don't have that in these major areas where your religion is a place that you go to kind of for affirmation, family is a place you go to for affirmation and validation, your friends, family, like all of those places, even like tell me how if this is, if you agree with this too, is like that it seems to me that the attack on even medical access and proper medical and affirming care is so invalidating, because that is a place, that's one of the places you're supposed to feel the safest and getting that. So that seems to me like you have all of these places that are invalidating, and the more you have, right, the harder it's going to be to validate yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, like I mentioned, everything kind of going on right now with different laws and stuff. It's very difficult where, it can feel like you're getting attacked kind of every day. Like in each of these different arenas, it feels like you cannot be yourself. You can't really be affirmed. Even small things like using the bathroom that you feel most comfortable in, we're constantly kind of getting attacked on all fronts and invalidated in all these different arenas.
Yeah. So in the midst of that, of all those obstacles, right, that it seems like that's really hard to, we don't have a ton of control over, right? Like we don't have a ton of control over national laws. We don't have a ton of control over whether our church or our spiritual community is affirming family too. Like we just don't have a ton of control over that. So how do individuals like really fight back against that internally? How does that get managed?
Yeah, I find, there's a few different ways, but the number one way I would say is to affirm yourself daily. Whatever safely that's going to look like for you, depending if you have the means, go out and buy an outfit that you feel comfortable in. Begin to look in the mirror and kind of use the name and the pronouns that you prefer. It's very crucial that you are able to, kind of understand how you're feeling and then validate that for yourself. We can't always rely on validation from other people, but just kind of small things where you can feel like, okay, this really feels like me. I've built like this small pocket of my life where I can be who I truly am. and kind of on a broader sense, like outside of ourselves, making an environment, like whether that's a friend group or even just, I know there's lots of groups like online, on Facebook, on Discord, kind of find your community, find like who is going to be validating to you, even if it's not, maybe friends that you grew up with or the family that you're born into, like kind of create your own family. And I think also, speaking of family, having like good boundaries with them to the extent that you can. Obviously, if you're, a younger teenager and you rely on your family for so much, the boundaries are going to you're going to have to kind of work and see like, what is my hard line? What am I willing to stand up for? Maybe it's name, and that's really important to you. And that's something you're like, I'm not going to be responding to being called this name that I don't identify with. So kind of really is just really going to depend on your individual situation. And then I think on like a broader sense, even outside of that, is really just kind of educate yourself, like see what resources are available to you. Sometimes people might not understand, but once you start talking to them and you are able to kind of explain, this is why I feel this way, this is kind of what I want to do with that. Most people are willing to at least have a conversation about it, and you might teach them something new that they didn't know, and then they can kind of be supportive now that they understand it a little bit more. So I think that's kind of the, going from a really micro all the way up to a macro level with it. I think those are kind of ways that you can kind of take each step. And then I think like encompassing all of those things is just making sure you're doing it safely. If there are certain environments where you're kind of going to be ostracized or at danger if you use the pronouns and name that you identify with, just kind of making sure that you're not putting yourself in harm's way, that those boundaries you're setting up are something that you can stick with, that is not going to put you at risk of, physical violence or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? Is that you're making sure that the safety is priority, right? Safety is number one. And even with like being able, I love what you're saying about kind of affirming yourself daily too, because that's something that we can be in complete control of, as far as like even in the most dire and difficult of circumstances, we can still affirm ourselves on a regular basis. And so being able to kind of affirm that what's true, and being able to trust yourself and validate yourself seems to be so key, even if you can't do all those others. And so I think that's just super important. Beckett, ask everybody kind of what's one thing, if people could only take one thing away from our conversation, what do you want them to take away?
I think the kind of overall biggest thing to remember is that you are valid in whatever identity you feel fits you the most. It doesn't really matter where you kind of are in your transition. If you're just starting, if you decide that you don't want to go with HRT or any surgeries or anything like that, like there's no set path you have to walk for this, and whatever you kind of decide fits you the most, like you are valid in that. It doesn't matter if people, if you're in the position where people are using your preferred name and pronouns yet, it does not make you any less valid than somebody who's, been socially transitioned for 10 years. So I think that just knowing that whatever you're feeling is true to you, and kind of just sticking with that, and not relying on like outside forces to be your sole sense of validation of that.
Yeah, I love that. There's that knowing that it's not just you. You're not alone in the world, and being able to kind of hold on to that is so vital and key. Beckett, thanks for the conversation. If we know that these are ways to begin to validate yourself, it's not the full journey, it's the beginning. And if you need further help with that, if you need professional help with that, we have tons of therapists like Beckett who can be supportive and helpful for that, and help you walk through those things. So you can check out all of our therapists at MathewsCounseling.net/therapist. You can also check out our queer therapist at MathewsCounseling.net/LGBTQ to get started and schedule an appointment with us right away. And we'll help get you matched with the therapist that is the best fit for you. Beckett, thanks again, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Adam.